Hello and welcome to BA 207, Introduction to E-Commerce. I'm your instructor, Paul Wheatcraft. So as we get started, just to go over a few brief things before we get into chapter 1 of the textbook. First, as I hope you all are aware of, this is a 100% online course. That means all the lectures have been recorded and moved online. And in fact, you are watching the lecture for chapter 1 as we speak. What this also means is that there are no scheduled face-to-face meetings. However, you can have a Zoom meeting with me at any time. Just make a request and we'll find a mutual time where we can both participate in that. Each week there will be a number of weekly assignments. What's important here is that your assignments must be completed on time in order to earn any credit. No late assignments without prior approval. The key here with online courses is don't procrastinate. It's too easy to fall behind. However, I do realize that life happens. Things get in the way, illnesses, busy time at work, family issues. When you have something that comes up that prevents you from getting your assignment done on time, just reach out to me ahead of the due date and ask for an extension, and I will gladly work with you. The key there is communicate with me before the due date. Now, some weeks do have a discussion question. Discussions actually have two dates. Unfortunately, with D2L, we can only show one due date. You do need to make your first post by midnight on Friday, and then you need to reply to at least 2 other posts by midnight on Sunday. As I said, unfortunately, D2L only shows the midnight Sunday due date, but in order to get full credit, you do need to make your first post by midnight Friday. And the reason I do that is that if I didn't do that, everyone would procrastinate and be trying to do all the posts late on Sunday night, and it makes it too hard. There's no posts for you to reply to because people haven't posted yet. So anyhow, each post should be very professional. This is not social media where you can use abbreviations and other things. Make it a professional communication, use proper spelling, grammar, punctuation, capitalization, so forth. Now, in general, the discussion topics that I have selected do not have cut and dry, black and white, right and wrong type of answers. So I'm looking for you to share your thoughts, what you came to and how you came to that conclusion. Why do you feel that certain way in response to that? And so it's really hard to do an adequate sharing with the rest of us in less than 2 paragraphs of 4 to 5 sentences each. So I give that to you as a guideline. If you find you've written a post and it's a single paragraph of 3 sentences, that is probably not adequate for the topic that we're dealing with. Okay, there are also 5 video case studies. These are short videos that you watch, and then I have a few questions that I want you to respond to on those. Now, each one of these are posted on the course website. You don't need to access the publisher's website. And again, this is a written assignment. I expect proper grammar, spelling, and format. Failure to do so will cost you points on your grade. Now, I do provide a sample assignment or 2 so you can get an idea of the length and format, what I'm looking for. And I've applied a minimum word count for your submissions. And the reason I do that is, again, it's a tool for you. If you check the word count and it's less than the minimum required for the assignment, it should indicate to you that you haven't done a thorough job in answering the questions. You need to go back and reread the questions and maybe expand a little bit on your answers. So again, it's a tool for you to help you make sure that you're giving an adequate analysis and response to the questions I posed. Now, for this course, we are not following traditional academic formatting for the papers. What the business department at BCC did a number of years ago is we went to major companies like Intel and Nike and asked them what format do they expect their employees to be using when communicating with written documents. And then we structured a style guide that reflects that. Some key differences to an academic style guide are: for business, you don't do double line spacing. Everything is single line spacing. Have a blank line between paragraphs. Do not indent paragraphs. Don't use full justification. This is not, you're not writing an article for a newspaper or for a book. Only use left justification. All the requirements are listed in an interactive document that is linked to from the homepage on the course website. Takes you right to the style guide if you have any questions. Each chapter out of the textbook also has a multiple choice quiz. Now, these quizzes are primarily for your benefit. If you take the quiz and you get a high score, great. That probably means that you have a good grasp of the content for that chapter. However, if you get a low score, it's an indication to you that you should go back, reread the material, look at things again, because you obviously didn't get something from the chapter. So it's a tool for you. To that end, I allow you to retake the quiz as many times as you want. Now, there is some randomization going in there. You won't get the exact same set of questions each time you take the quiz. But again, I want you to get 100% on the quiz, because when you do that, it means that you probably got the key points out of the chapter. Now, in order to take the quiz, though, it has a password. And you need the password so you can unlock the quiz. Where you get the password is in the lecture video. And in fact, a little later in this video, there will be a slide that will come up with the password for the Chapter 1 quiz. And I'll talk more about that when we get to that slide in the presentation. The good news is there are no midterms or final exams in this class. In my long career in corporate America, I never once had my manager give me a test for my annual performance review. Instead, they looked at the work that I had completed during that year. And that's why I don't use a midterm or a final. Your assessment comes strictly on the assignments that you submit during this class. So I'm gauging you on the work that you're doing. Now, probably a good time to take and mention a word on it, and it's mentioned in the syllabus as well. AI is quite prevalent now. AI is pretty good. It is not perfect. The best way to use AI is to use it as a way to create a rough draft. But then you need to read it and see, do you agree with the wording and the ideas that AI came up with for you? AI does not get it right. It maybe it's 90% of the time correct, but there's a number of times where AI will actually put in incorrect information. So you can't rely on it. I don't want you to. Business, doesn't want you to. It's a tool. Use it to help you, but use your intelligence along with AI when you're writing documents or doing research. Okay, in order to be in the class, the college does require all instructors to confirm that each student has participated in that first week of the class. To satisfy that college requirement for this class, I have several activities that you have to complete by Friday of the first week. You need to complete the syllabus quiz. And they're very simple questions. I think there's only 10 questions for the syllabus quiz, and they're just straight out of the syllabus. Read the syllabus on the course website, and you'll be able to ace the quiz. You need to post to the student introduction discussion. One of the challenges with online courses is they can be very cold and impersonal. And I really encourage you to share with us something about you, especially the last thing when I ask, something unusual or unique about you. We all have unique characteristics, hobbies, life experiences. Just share a little bit so we can feel a little bit more like a community. Nothing replaces face-to-face meeting, but use this as a way to help a little bit. You need to read chapter 1 in the textbook. Now we're using an e-textbook in order to keep the costs down to students. You can purchase a print copy if you want, but not through PCC. You would have to buy it directly from the publisher. You need to watch this video, which you're doing right now, which is good, because you also need to complete the chapter 1 quiz. And so you need the password that we will get to a little bit later during this video. So before we go into this, this week's material from the textbook, I thought I'd share just a little bit with you about myself. Some of it is written on, I have posted on the course website, but I thought I'd go over it again. I spent over 45 years in corporate America. And during that time, I had a variety of roles. You can see I listed some here that's including that. There are other roles that I had. I worked in virtually every department within a business. And so I got experience in all aspects of that. And I worked for a number of different companies. I worked for small startup companies as well as a couple of the giants, General Electric and Tyco. I had a lot of my global experience came about with Tyco, although I did also have some with Schneider. I worked for public, private, and nonprofit companies. And each of those type of companies have some differences, but a lot and similar too. And lastly, I've owned 2 of my own businesses, a sole proprietorship and an LLC. During my corporate roles, I was focused primarily on the medical device market and the high tech market. Companies like Intel was one of my customers, medical companies, GE Medical, Philips Medical, Siemens Medical, all the major medical companies. I was born and raised in San Diego and finished up my college work in Washington. But I've also lived in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Oregon, but I really consider Oregon to be my home. We first moved here in 1975, and then we did a little bit, 4-year stint in the mid 80s in Wisconsin, and then moved back to Oregon in 1985, and been here ever since. And we really like Oregon. I do have degrees in mathematics, electrical engineering, and a master's in business. When you need to address me, you can use my first name, my last name, Professor Wheatcraft, Instructor Wheatcraft. Any of those are fine. All I ask is that anything you use to address me, as long as it's polite and respectful, I'll answer to just about anything. And then lastly, to give you a little bit of a trivia, something a little different about myself. In addition to my mathematics degree, I, in essence, had a music minor, and my major instrument was the oboe. Okay, e-commerce, chapter 1. Now, the title of this, the author is calling this "The Revolution is Just Beginning." I would say we're really probably a little past that. That was true a few years ago. I'd say we're full force into e-commerce is a integral part of society today. One thing I will point out, since we're looking at here, is you'll see the spelling here, capital E dash and then commerce. You will also see that word done as lowercase e, capital C, commerce. There's several different ways that e-commerce is spelled. I'll accept any of those because there is not a real consistency as to how it's supposed to be, what the preferred way is on it. Anyhow, so let's look at the evolution. What we have experienced is extremely rapid advances in technology. And that continues today. They keep making advances on what they can do in the microprocessors and the integrated circuits and how that all works. And that has allowed things to occur with e-commerce that, 20 years ago, no one even dreamed about, because the technology has been giving them tools to address this thing of primarily business to consumer sales, but also business to business sales that have really taken off and participate in the e-commerce. And notice the title on this slide, like I was just saying a minute ago. Here, the author uses little e commerce, where the previous slide they had capital E dash commerce. So the author isn't even consistent in how they refer to it. Now, one of the things that happened with the pandemic is it really put e-commerce into hyperdrive. All of us were ordering everything on Amazon. We were ordering food from the grocery store. With e-commerce, it just accelerated what was already in process and growing very rapidly and just put it on steroids. And so coming out of the pandemic, we're all used to doing this now, this way of doing things. And so it's just continuing to accelerate. Now, something I found interesting, and this actually, I found this information on it was a Citibank report that they had done. And globally now, 57% of e-commerce is done on a mobile device. Now, that number's a little deceiving, and I'll talk about it here in a minute, but it's people using a mobile device as their way of doing it. Now, that presents some unique challenges, as I'm sure all of you have already experienced trying to do it on your own cell phone. There are some things that you would like to purchase that have very detailed specifications or pictures or other things, and it's really hard on that little tiny screen to pack all that information in. One of the keys and one of the challenges with e-commerce in general is how to make it easy to use on a mobile device. It presents some real challenges, and I'm sure you've all seen some companies that do a good job of that, of adapting to a cell phone screen, and other companies where it's a joke. You can't really do it. Now, the interesting thing is, though, that only 16% of the actual sales, so close the deal, here's my credit card, send the product to me, only 16% of those final deals are actually completed on a mobile device. So the difference between the 57 and the 16 is a lot of people are doing research on the mobile device, but when it comes time to actually make the purchase, only 16% of those sales are being done on mobile device. And I think part of that may be because someone is desiring the larger screen to be able to see the product or look in more details before they actually make the purchase. Another thing that's interesting is that when it comes to that final purchase, tablets are used more often than desktop computers. Not really sure why, because if I'm going to go to a bigger screen, why not go to a really big screen? The screen I'm looking at right now talking to you is a 23-inch screen. I'm going to be upgrading my system to have I think I'm going to have a 32-inch screen in the center and two 25-inch screens flanking it. Um, I just find it's so much easier when you can have a big screen. So I'm not sure the why tablets are being used more than desktops, but that's what the numbers show. Another interesting change in e-commerce is that on a global basis, 53% of online transactions use digital wallets. Now, that's been driven a lot by, I think, primarily in Asia and countries outside of the US that were really uh, much faster and much quicker to embrace the concept of digital wallets than we have been in the US. I think the US, compared to the rest of the world, still uses credit cards much more often than digital wallets, but that's changing. So, what are the trends that the author sees? And I agree with some of the business trends include things have slowed down a little bit after the pandemic. They were nuts during the pandemic. Amazon's growth was astronomical, not sustainable. That was a unique situation. And so things are kind of back down to a more normal 10% growth, which is still a huge growth, far greater than the population growth. We talked a little bit already about mobile devices. The use of smartphone apps compared to a business's website has increased dramatically. In fact, and I didn't write down the percentage, it was also in that Citibank report, but it was a pretty high percentage, like 86% of users prefer using a company's smartphone app rather than using the website on their phone. And I think one of the reasons is that most websites have not been designed to work well on the phone. The challenge there is keeping the same functionality regardless of what device you use. And a lot of companies don't do a very good job of that. The social e-commerce is an interesting phenomena, and that's been driven, I think, a lot by Facebook Marketplace and others. A lot of growth. I don't think anyone really envisioned that. But as I mentioned earlier, this is not just you and I that are participating in this e-commerce. And notice how e-commerce is spelled on this one down below. See, lowercase e dash and then lowercase c. Like I said, the author is all over the place with it because there's no agreed upon proper spelling and capitalization for it. But a lot of companies are utilizing e-commerce for when they're purchasing their supplies and other things from other companies. We don't have the as much anymore the salesman making a call on a company and looking at a catalog and other things. A lot of it is done electronically now. Governments put out bids for projects on a e-commerce based system. A lot of government and businesses are heavily leveraging and utilizing e-commerce in their day-to-day operation. So some of the technology trends, like I said, I've already talked about. Mobile is the key word. Whenever you're thinking about e-commerce, you need to be thinking about how do you communicate your product or your service with a mobile device. Certainly, cloud computing has become, just no one thinks twice about it. Everyone takes it for granted that everything is stored in the cloud, but that brings about some unique challenges. Just an FYI, if you haven't taken BA 131, I also teach that, and we go into cloud computing and how it works and the problems and challenges in cloud computing. And one of the video case studies that you take and do in this class is actually a brief one on cloud computing. The Internet of Things has really impacted this idea that all of our devices can talk to each other, or we can access them over the internet remotely from wherever we are traveling. It sounds great at first, but the caveat is a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. When you have a video doorbell and a refrigerator and your thermostat and your computer connected to your home Wi-Fi, if any one of those has a weak security system, someone can break into your system through that device. And certainly that applies to businesses, but it also applies to things like hospitals. There have been cases where the hospital system was compromised because of I'm trying to remember what the device was. It was like a blood pressure monitor that was hooked up to the hospital network, and there was a security flaw in it that a cyber criminal discovered and took advantage of, and then ransomed the hospital because they locked down all their data. So the Internet of Things is one of those good news, bad news things. Big data you'll hear talked about a lot. And actually, and again, we talk about this in BA 131. The challenge with big data is the first word, big. You should probably replace that with huge, enormous, unimaginable. How much data is available out there now? The challenge with that is finding the data you want. The other challenge is, how do you keep the data you don't want being shared around the world getting out there? And that's a lot of the data breaches that we've heard about. You know, your personal information is out there. It's all part of the big data that's out there on the web. AI technology, certainly, as I mentioned a little bit before at the start, be careful when you use AI. AI has been, for lack of a better word, caught making up citations and other things that were incorrect. So don't take it verbatim. One of the AI tools that I use all the time, and I strongly encourage you to use, it's a plugin for Word, and it's called Grammarly. And I include it on the course website. It's a free plugin, and it does a pretty darn good job of checking your spelling and grammar and making suggestions to you. But it is not 100% correct. I would say probably 95% of the time I accept Grammarly's suggestions. But there's, that 5 to 10% of the time I look at it and I say, no, what I wrote is correct. It got it wrong. So understand the limitations of any tool you use. AI is not perfect. Now, another major change or trend and change that has happened in e-commerce is this idea of blockchain. Like I say, we go through it in more detail in BA 131. And I'm ending up sounding like I'm promoting BA 131, which hopefully, because this is a 200 series course, you've already taken BA 131. But blockchain is being used in e-commerce as well as a way of guaranteeing authenticity and validity of things. I'm not going to go into more detail on that, but it is something that's being used for a lot more than Bitcoin and things like that. So some of the things going on in society is user-generated content. There used to be, with YouTube, people were doing, the infamous cat videos and stuff, but really with TikTok, it kind of exploded where people are generating a lot of content. And that can also then apply to selling products through Etsy and other things where individuals are generating what's going on in e-commerce. With all of this, of course, comes the challenge of privacy. And certainly there have been both commercial and governmental invasions misuses of our personal data and information, an invasion of our privacy. I hate it. I will get a phone call from a company I have never done business with and do not intend to do business with it, and yet they call me on my cell phone and try and sell me something. That's an invasion. That is not something I ask for. And that is a challenge with e-commerce and how we manage our customers' data so that we don't compromise their information out onto the web. Certainly, one of the concerns have come up, and this is not just in the US, but Europe has been very concerned about this. The big major companies have a huge dominance, and there's real concerns about monopolies and what that does. Don't have good answers on that. I think things are probably, most of you, I doubt, are old enough to remember, but I do, when the US government broke AT&T up because they said one phone company handling everything for the country is not good, and broke it into smaller companies. We may be looking at that sometime in the future. Now with Amazon, Walmart is really trying to make a strong run against Amazon, and they are making some headway. Anyhow, online security issues, talked a little bit about that when it comes to data and personal information, and certainly any financial information. You need to take this seriously in any financial activities that you do. Make sure that you are on a secure network. You never use the network at, the Wi-Fi at Starbucks or at the airport. Make sure you're on a secure network if you're going to do any financial transactions. Okay, now at some point each week during the lecture, a screen like this will pop up. Now it's only going to be visible for 2 to 3 seconds. I won't say anything during this time, and then it'll move on to the next thing. So you need to be paying attention. You should have a piece of paper and a pencil handy, so when it does pop up, you can write down the word very quickly. And the reason I do this is to try and prevent students from, fast forwarding through the lecture, trying to look through, find the password slide. So I try and make it hard for you to do that to where you actually have to watch it. But it does mean you need to pay attention, because if you are checking, social media or answering another phone call, it may come up and go before you even realize it. So anyhow, the password for this week is mobile. Challenges in e-commerce. One of the ones that I see a lot is how you get noticed. You can have a great product or service, but there are so many companies and products out there. How do you get in front of your customers? How do you find that customer base? That's not an easy task. And no, just saying advertising on social media is not adequate because everybody's doing it. If only a few people were doing it, that could work. So the challenge there is finding the right channels to promote your product or service so that your intended market hears and knows about you. Timeliness. What's new and innovative today is old news tomorrow. So you have to really be agile and working quickly and fastly. When a new technology comes out, the competition releases something new, you have to be able to respond lightning fast. And one of the challenges with that is a lot of our products that we use today that are changing rapidly are very complex and have complex supply chains. And so you really need to have a strong supply chain management process in place. Another issue, of course, is fraud. How do we prevent someone from fraudulently ordering our products or services And another one is knockoffs. If you come up with a really innovative, great product, there is someone somewhere else in the world that is very willing to make a copy of it and market it as the same. Some of the knockoffs are really impressive, and so having to deal with that. And of course, if the knockoff isn't of the same quality as your product, that can taint your product's reputation and the name of your company as well. And another thing is unfair reviews. There have been some court cases on this where a competitor, paid people to post a whole bunch of negative things about, their competition. But it is a challenge. How do you ensure that those reviews are reasonable? And just as a rule of thumb, I'll tell you something that if you have more than 80 to 90% positive views, that's not a good thing. That looks like you are cherry picking and taking off negative reviews. You don't want 100% positive. Nobody has that. No one satisfies a customer 100% of the time. But conversely, if you have low ratings, that's something you have to be monitoring and looking into. Why is that happening? One, do we have a problem that we need to address and fix? Or two, is someone trying to fraudulently give us a bad name? And the last is customer service. And a real challenge here is in this global economy and e-commerce, and thank you, pandemic, and thank you, Amazon. People have expectations now that they can get customer service 24/7, 365. And it's not practical for most businesses to have staff, there to take these calls 24/7, 365. How, what can you do? What can you put in place? Certainly with AI, there are some of the chat bots are getting much better. I still find them usually not helpful, uh, because if it was a simple problem, I wouldn't be calling in. I already know the answer. I'm usually calling in with a complex problem that the chat bot ends up saying, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. But it's something you need to think about and deal with. How do you address customer service? And that's it for chapter 1. Like I say, this was a high level. We will be covering all of these topics in more details in subsequent chapters.